Sometimes the people who save us come in the smallest packages. Sometimes a child's love is stronger than any mountain winter. In 1882, deep in the Colorado mountains, a lonely man named Silas Crow needed a cook for his cabin. He posted a notice in town and waited. No one came. Then one frozen morning, a little girl appeared at his door, carrying a flour sack and her mother's old recipes. Her name was Emma, and she was only 8 years old. "Mom's too sick to come, so I'm here instead," she said with quiet courage. What happened next changed everything. Could these two lost souls find family in each other before winter's end? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silas Crow had been alone on the mountain for 6 years, and he had convinced himself that was exactly how he wanted it. His cabin sat at 7,800 feet, tucked into a natural shelf of granite, where the wind couldn't reach it directly, but where he could see for miles down the valley. He'd built it himself after arriving in Colorado, using pine and spruce from the surrounding forest, chinked with clay and moss. It wasn't large, just one main room with a sleeping alcove, a storage area, and a root cellar dug into the mountainside, but it was solid and warm, and it was his. The interior told the story of a man who had once lived differently. 3 walls were lined with bookshelves he'd constructed from scrap lumber, and those shelves sagged under the weight of volumes he'd carried up the mountain over the years. Shakespeare and Milton, Thoreau and Emerson, Darwin's Origin of Species and Gibbon's Decline and Fall, medical texts and astronomy guides, poetry collections and philosophical treatises, more books than any mountain man had right to own. More books than made sense for a man who claimed to want nothing to do with civilization. On the small table near the window sat a hand-carved chess set, each piece carved with meticulous care from different woods. The white pieces were aspen, pale and smooth. The black pieces were walnut, dark and rich. Silas had spent an entire winter carving that set, back when his hands were steadier and his eyes sharper. He rarely touched it anymore. Playing chess alone felt too much like talking to ghosts. The hearth was built from riverstone he'd hauled up from the creek bed below, and above it hung his rifle, a Winchester 73. He kept cleaned and oiled, though he rarely used it for anything but hunting. Next to the rifle was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. The image had faded to sepia tones, but you could still make out the faces. A woman with kind eyes and dark hair, a little girl with ribbons in her braids, and a younger version of Silas himself, smiling in a way that seemed to belong to a different man entirely. He was 43 years old now, though the mountain had aged him in ways that numbers couldn't capture. His hair, once dark brown, had gone mostly gray. His face was weathered from wind and sun, creased with lines around his eyes and mouth. He stood just over 6 feet tall, lean and strong from years of physical labor, but there was a weariness to him that went deeper than tired muscles. It lived in his eyes, a kind of permanent sadness that no amount of rest could cure. Silas had been a schoolteacher once, back in Pennsylvania. He taught literature and history to children in a small town outside Philadelphia, and he'd loved it. He'd loved the way a child's face would light up when they finally understood a difficult concept, loved the smell of chalk dust and old books, loved the rhythm of the academic year with its clear beginnings and endings. He'd been happy then. He'd had Catherine, his wife of 10 years, who taught piano and sang in the church choir. They'd had Rebecca, their daughter, 7 years old and bright as a new penny, who'd inherited her mother's musical talent and her father's love of stories. Then the fever came. It had swept through town one autumn, moving from house to house like something with intention, something with malice. Catherine fell ill first. 3 days later, Rebecca followed. Silas had sat up with them night after night, applying cool cloths to burning foreheads, spooning broth between cracked lips, praying to a God he'd stopped believing in years before. Catherine died on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun came up. Rebecca held on until Thursday evening, calling for her mother even as Silas held her hand. He'd buried them side by side in the town cemetery, under an oak tree where they used to have picnics in the summer. Then he'd walked away from his life as completely as a man could walk away from anything. He'd sold the house, given away most of his possessions, kept only his books and a few personal items. He'd headed west with no particular destination in mind. Just a need to put distance between himself and the place where he'd lost everything. He'd ended up in Colorado because the mountains felt appropriate somehow. Their permanence, their indifference, their absolute lack of sentiment. He'd found this spot and built his cabin and convinced himself that this was enough. That solitude was safety. That if you didn't love anything, you couldn't lose anything. For 6 years, it had almost worked. His days followed a pattern as regular as clockwork. Wake at first light, build up the fire, make coffee, strong and black, the way he'd learned to drink it. Breakfast was usually cornmeal mush or fried potatoes, whatever was simplest. Then the work of survival, chopping wood, checking traps, hunting when the larder ran low, maintaining the cabin and outbuildings, tending the small garden patch in summer. Once a month, he'd make the 5-mile trek down to Timber Ridge, the small town at the base of the mountain. He'd trade furs for supplies, flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, lamp oil. He'd collect his mail, mostly correspondence from a former colleague in Philadelphia who refused to let their friendship die completely. He'd speak to people only as much as necessary, conducting his business with polite efficiency, then disappear back up the mountain before anyone could ask too many questions. The townspeople had learned to leave him alone. They called him the ghost of the mountain when they thought he couldn't hear, and maybe they were right. He felt like a ghost sometimes, a remnant of someone who used to be fully alive, still going through motions out of habit rather than purpose. But this past summer, something had changed. He'd noticed it first in small ways. His hands shook more than they used to. His breath came shorter on the steep climbs, a persistent cough that wouldn't quite go away. He was getting older, and the mountain was getting harder. More troubling were the moments when he'd lose track of time, standing at the window, staring at nothing, realizing hours had passed and he couldn't account for them, or the times he'd forget whether he'd eaten that day, finding stale bread on the table and not remembering whether he'd left it there that morning or days before. Loneliness, he'd finally admitted to himself, was starting to do damage. The human mind wasn't meant to go this long without conversation, without connection, without purpose beyond mere survival. So in late September, as the aspens turned gold and the first cold winds began sweeping down from the peaks, Silas had done something he never thought he'd do. He'd written out a notice on a piece of paper torn from one of his notebooks. Cook wanted. Mountain cabin. Room and board plus $20 monthly. Must be hardy and self-sufficient. Inquire at Fletcher's General Store, Timber Ridge. He'd posted it on the board outside Fletcher's store and then retreated back up the mountain, half hoping no one would respond, half terrified that no one would. A week passed. Then 2, then 3. The weather turned colder. Snow dusted the high peaks. The aspens lost their leaves and stood skeletal against the grey sky. Silas made his monthly trip to town and found his notice still on the board, weathered and curling at the edges, but with no inquiries waiting at the store. Folks are settling in for winter, Fletcher had told him, not unkindly. Not many willing to head up the mountain this time of year. Come spring, maybe you'll have better luck. But spring was 5 months away, and Silas wasn't sure he had 5 months of solitude left in him. He'd nodded and collected his supplies and made the long walk back up the mountain, resignation settling over him like the snow that had begun to fall in earnest. He'd make it through another winter alone. He'd done it before. He'd managed 6 years. He could manage another few months. When spring came, he'd try again. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe this was simply how his life would end, alone on a mountain, forgotten, with nothing but his books and his memories for company. The first serious snow came in mid-October, 3 days of steady fall that left drifts up to the cabin's windowsills. Silas spent those days inside, reading by lamplight, rationing his firewood, trying not to think about how quiet it was. How the silence pressed against his eardrums like a physical thing. How even the sound of turning pages seemed too loud. On the fourth day, the snow stopped. The sun came out, painfully bright against the white landscape, and Silas forced himself outside to dig paths to the woodshed and the privy. The work felt good, physical labor that quieted the mind, that made the blood move faster through cold, stiffened limbs. He was stacking wood inside the cabin when he heard it, a sound so unexpected that at first he thought he'd imagined it. A knock. 3 small, tentative raps on his cabin door. Silas straightened slowly, a piece of firewood still in his hands. He waited, thinking perhaps it had been a branch falling from the roof or ice cracking somewhere. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was at his door. His first thought was that Dr. Harrison had made the trip from town. The doctor sometimes checked on him after bad weather, though Silas had never encouraged it. But Harrison's knock was bold, confident. This was hesitant, almost apologetic. Silas set down the firewood and crossed to the door. His hand paused on the latch for just a moment. In 6 years, he could count on both hands the number of times someone had knocked on his door. Each time had been an intrusion, a reminder of the world he was trying to escape. He opened the door, and there stood a child. She was small, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old, with dark hair hanging in 2 braids over her thin shoulders. She wore a coat that was too large for her, probably handed down or borrowed, and boots that had seen better days. In her arms, she clutched a flour sack, bulging with what looked like cooking supplies, but it was her face that stopped Silas cold. She had large brown eyes that looked too old for her face, eyes that had seen hardship and loss. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her lips chapped. But there was something in her expression, a determination, a steadiness, that seemed impossible for someone so young. They stared at each other for a long moment. Silas couldn't find words. This made no sense. There were no homesteads near his cabin. The closest neighbor was 3 miles down the mountain. No child should be out in this weather, and certainly no child should be standing at his door alone. "Are you Mr. Crow?" the girl asked. Her voice was quiet but clear, with just a slight tremor that might have been from cold or fear or both. "I am," Silas managed. "Are you lost?" "Where are your parents?" "I'm not lost," she said. "I came about the notice for the cook position." She shifted the flour sack in her arms. "My name is Emma Hartley. Mom's too sick to come, so I came instead." Silas stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing and hearing. A child at his door, claiming to be here for the cook position. "That's not possible," he said finally. "The notice was for an adult. A grown woman or man who could—" "I can cook," Emma interrupted, her chin lifting slightly. "Mom taught me. I've been doing all the cooking at home since she got sick. I can make bread and stew and biscuits and pie. I can clean and do laundry and mend clothes. I'm stronger than I look." "Child, that's not the point. You shouldn't be here at all. Where's your mother? Does she know you've come up here?" Emma's face flickered with something, guilt perhaps, or defiance. "She knows I went to find work. She needs medicine, and we need money for food. The doctor said she can't get better without proper medicine, and we can't afford it. So she sent you." Silas felt anger rising in his chest, though he wasn't sure who he was angry at. What kind of mother would send a child up a mountain in winter to work for a stranger? "She didn't send me exactly," Emma admitted, her voice smaller now. "She thought Mr. Henderson would hire me at the hotel, but he said I was too young. Then I saw your notice and I thought—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought maybe you wouldn't turn me away." The cold was seeping into the cabin through the open door. Silas could see Emma shivering now, though she was trying to hide it. Her fingers clutching the flour sack were white at the knuckles. "Come inside," he said gruffly, stepping back. "Before you freeze." Emma hesitated for just a moment, then stepped over the threshold. Her eyes went wide as she took in the cabin, the books, the chess set, the warmth of the fire. She stood awkwardly just inside the door, as if unsure whether she should go further. Silas closed the door and studied her more carefully. She was thin, too thin. The coat hung on her like it was draped over a stick frame. Her face had the hollowed look of someone who'd missed too many meals. But her eyes were bright and intelligent, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of courage well beyond her years. "How old are you?" he asked. "8, almost 9. And your father?" "Dead. Mining accident 2 years ago." The simple, matter-of-fact way she said it made Silas's chest ache. He recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone who'd learned to state terrible truths without emotion, because the emotion would be too much to bear. "And your mother is ill?" "Yes, sir. She has the consumption. Dr. Harrison says she's had it for months, maybe longer. She kept working as long as she could. She took in washing and mending, but last month she got too weak. She can't hardly get out of bed now." Silas ran a hand over his face. This was impossible. He couldn't hire a child. It would be irresponsible, possibly illegal. He should send her straight back down the mountain, maybe even escort her himself to make sure she got home safely. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't that simple. She'd walked 5 miles up a mountain in the snow. 5 miles. A child of 8 years old alone, carrying supplies, in October weather that could turn deadly without warning. That took either desperation or determination, and probably both. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "Put your things down. I'll make you something." "I can make it," she said quickly. "That's what I'm here for. I can show you I know how." Before Silas could protest, she'd set the flour sack on the table and was removing her oversized coat. Underneath, she wore a simple dress, faded and patched but clean. She rolled up her sleeves and looked around the cabin with an appraising eye. "Where do you keep your pans?" she asked. Silas pointed to the hooks near the hearth, still too surprised to do much else. Emma retrieved a cast-iron skillet and set it on the stove. She moved with efficiency, adding wood to the fire, checking the damper. From her flour sack she produced a small cloth bundle. "I brought bacon," she said. "And eggs. I thought I should show you right away that I can do the work." She worked quickly, despite her small size, slicing the bacon thin and laying it in the pan. The smell of it cooking filled the cabin, rich and savory. While the bacon sizzled, she mixed up a simple batter: flour, a little milk from the crock Silas kept in the cold cellar, a pinch of salt. She fried up 3 corn cakes to go with the bacon and eggs, plating everything neatly. "There," she said, setting the plate before him. "That's breakfast. Or lunch, I guess. I wasn't sure what time you ate." Silas looked at the food, then at the child who'd prepared it. The meal was simple but competently made. The bacon was crisp without being burnt. The eggs were perfectly cooked. The corn cakes were golden brown. "Aren't you eating?" he asked. "I will after you taste it," Emma said, "to make sure it's all right." There was such earnestness in her voice that Silas felt something crack inside his chest. She was terrified he'd send her away. Terrified she'd failed some test. This child, who should have been playing with dolls or learning to read in a schoolhouse, was standing in a stranger's cabin trying to prove her worth through cooking. He took a bite of the bacon, then the eggs, then the corn cake. "It's good," he said quietly. "Very good." Relief flooded Emma's face. She quickly made herself a smaller plate and sat at the far end of the table, eating with careful, measured bites. Not the way a hungry child would eat, but the way someone who'd learned to make food last would eat. They ate in silence for a few moments. Then Silas set down his fork. "Emma," he said, "this is a kind offer, and you're clearly capable. But I can't hire you. You're a child. You should be in school, not working in a stranger's cabin on a mountain." "There is no school," Emma said. "Not anymore. The teacher left last spring, and they haven't found a new one. And I need to work. We need the money. Please, Mr. Crow, I can do this. I'm not afraid of hard work. It's not about hard work. It's about—" Silas stopped, trying to find the right words. "It's not appropriate. Your mother needs care. You should be with her. Mrs. Henderson checks on her every day," Emma said quickly. "The hotel owner's wife. She's been very kind. She brings soup and helps Mom wash. But Mom needs medicine more than she needs me sitting by her bed. The doctor says the medicine costs $5. $5, and we don't have it. But if I work here for a month, we'll have the money. We'll have enough for medicine and food and maybe even the rent." She looked at him with those 2 old eyes, and Silas saw something in them that made his decision impossible. He saw desperation, yes, but also hope. This child was trying to save her mother's life the only way she knew how. 1 week, he heard himself say. A trial period. If you can manage the work and this is important, if someone checks on your mother every day and reports back to me that she's being cared for, then we'll discuss a longer arrangement. A week, Emma repeated, her face brightening. I can do a week. I can do more than a week. You'll see, Mr. Crow, you won't regret this. I regret it already, Silas muttered. But there was no heat in it. He showed her the storage room, really just a glorified closet where he kept extra supplies. It was small but dry with enough space for a bedroll. Emma looked at it like he'd offered her a palace. It's perfect, she said. You'll need blankets. More than I have. And better clothes for winter. Tomorrow I brought my own blankets, Emma interrupted, patting her flour sack. And I have my mother's old shawl. I'll be fine, Mr. Crow, you'll see. I won't be any trouble at all. That, Silas thought as he watched her unpack her meager belongings, was almost certainly not true. A child in his cabin, disrupting his solitude, requiring care and attention and conversation, it was trouble by definition. But as Emma carefully arranged her small pile of possessions in the storage room, as she smoothed out her bedroll with those small, capable hands, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. He felt needed, and terrifying as that was. It wasn't entirely unwelcome. Emma rose before dawn. Silas woke to the sound of movement in the main room, the quiet scrape of the stove door opening, the soft clink of the poker against iron. He lay in his alcove for a moment, disoriented. For 6 years, he'd been the only source of sound in this cabin. Now there was someone else moving through his space, and the strangeness of it made his heart beat faster. He dressed quickly and stepped out to find Emma kneeling before the stove, trying to coax the banked coals back to life. Her small hands struggled with the heavy cast-iron door, and she was blowing on the embers hard enough to make herself lightheaded. You need kindling first, Silas said from the alcove entrance. Emma jumped, nearly dropping the poker. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. I wanted to have breakfast ready before you got up. It's all right. Silas crossed to the woodbox and selected a few pieces of pitch pine, the kind that caught easily. He showed her how to arrange them over the coals, how to leave space for air to flow. The fire caught within moments, crackling cheerfully. Oh, Emma said softly. That's much better than what I was doing. Takes practice, Silas said. This stove can be temperamental. He meant to leave her to it, to retreat to his alcove and give her space to work. But he found himself lingering, watching as she filled the coffee pot with water from the bucket, as she measured out the grounds with careful precision. Her movements were confident but not quite practiced, like someone following instructions from memory rather than habit. Your mother taught you to make coffee? He asked. Yes, sir. She said a good cook needs to know how to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, but smooth enough not to poison them. Despite himself, Silas smiled. Sounds like a wise woman. She is, Emma said firmly, using the present tense with defiant hope. She's the smartest person I know. She can quote Shakespeare and do sums in her head faster than anyone. Before she got sick, she wanted to be a teacher. Like you, Silas felt his smile fade. How do you know I was a teacher? Mrs. Henderson told me. She said you used to teach back east before you came here. She said you were very learned. Mrs. Henderson talks too much, Silas muttered, but there was no real annoyance in it. Breakfast was oatmeal, with a bit of honey stirred in, and more of the corn cakes from yesterday. Emma ate standing up, ready to refill his coffee or fetch anything he needed. It made Silas uncomfortable, this child waiting on him like a servant. Sit down, he said. Eat properly? Yes, sir. Emma sat across from him, but she perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to spring up at any moment. After breakfast, Silas laid out the expectations. She would cook 3 meals a day, keep the cabin clean, help with laundry when needed. In return, she would receive room, board, and at the end of the week, $2. If the arrangement continued, she'd receive the full $20 monthly as promised in the notice. But there are rules, Silas said firmly. You don't go outside alone in bad weather. You don't wander away from the cabin. And if there's any trouble, Any sign that this isn't working, you go straight back down the mountain to your mother. Understood? Understood, Emma said solemnly. The morning passed in an awkward dance of proximity and distance. Emma cleaned the breakfast dishes while Silas chopped wood outside. When he came back in, she was sweeping the floor. When she went to the root cellar for potatoes, he sat by the fire pretending to read but actually listening to make sure she didn't fall down the steep steps. Around midday, Emma asked permission to explore the cabin's shelves. She stood before the wall of books with such longing that Silas couldn't help but ask, "Do you read?" "A little," Emma said. "Mum taught me my letters and some simple words. But we don't have many books. Just a Bible and a farmer's almanac." Silas stood and selected a volume from the shelf, a collection of Aesop's fables with illustrations. "Try this one." Emma took the book like it was made of gold. She opened it carefully and began to read aloud, slowly and haltingly. "The fox and the grapes. A gun hungry," Silas corrected gently. "Hungry fox saw some grapes." She stumbled over the next word, her face scrunching with concentration. "Hanging," Silas supplied. "Hanging from a vine." He jumped and jumped but could not reach them. She continued through the fable, stopping frequently for help. When she finished, she looked up at him with shining eyes. "I read a whole story." "You did," Silas said, and felt something loosen in his chest. "Would you like to practice more? Reading is a useful skill, could I?" "Really? 1 hour each evening after dinner." "If you keep up with your other work, I will," Emma promised. "I'll work twice as hard. You'll see." That afternoon, Silas retrieved something from the trunk in his alcove, something he hadn't touched in years. His father's pocket watch. It was silver, tarnished now, with a white face and Roman numerals. The watch didn't work anymore. The mechanism had frozen years ago. But it had weight and history, and it would serve a purpose. He found Emma preparing vegetables for dinner, her small knife working steadily through a potato. "Emma," he said, "come here for a moment." She set down the knife and approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Silas held out the watch. "This was my father's. The watch doesn't work anymore, but I want you to have it." Emma's eyes went wide. "I can't take that. It's too valuable." "It's not about value. It's about time." Silas pressed the watch into her palm. "Time is the one thing we can't get back. My father used to say that if you're going to spend your time on something, make sure it's worth the spending. You're spending your time here, working hard to help your mother. That's worth something. That's worth a great deal." Emma closed her fingers around the watch, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mr. Crow. You can use it to learn to tell time properly," Silas added, feeling awkward with her gratitude. "Even though it doesn't tick, it still shows what time looks like. The positions of the hands, what they mean." "I'd like that," Emma said softly. That evening, after a dinner of potato stew and fresh bread that Emma had managed despite the altitude's effect on rising dough, they sat by the fire for the promised reading lesson. Emma struggled through 3 more fables, but each one came a little easier than the last. When Silas finally told her it was time for bed, Emma stood slowly, reluctant to stop. "Mr. Crow," she said as she reached the storage room door. "Yes?" "Thank you for letting me stay, for teaching me." "But," she paused, seeming to search for words. "For being kind." After she'd closed the door, Silas sat alone by the fire, the cabin quiet again except for the crackle of burning wood. But it was a different kind of quiet now. Not the empty silence he'd grown used to, but the peaceful quiet of a day well spent. He picked up his own book, but found he couldn't concentrate on the words. His mind kept drifting to the child in the storage room, clutching a broken pocket watch like it was treasure, and he realized with something like alarm that he'd enjoyed today. The teaching, the small conversations, the sense of purpose that came from having someone else to consider. He'd let his guard down, just a little, just enough to remember what it felt like to matter to another person. It was dangerous, he knew. Caring was dangerous. But as he banked the fire for the night and checked to make sure Emma's door was securely closed against the cold, Silas couldn't quite bring himself to regret it. 3 days into their arrangement, Emma woke with a fever. Silas heard it in her cough, a deep rattling sound that came from her chest. When she emerged from the storage room that morning, her face was flushed, and her eyes had a glassy brightness that had nothing to do with enthusiasm. "I'm fine," she said, before he could speak. "Just a little cold. I'll start breakfast. You'll do no such thing." Silas was across the room in 3 strides, his hand going to her forehead. She was burning up. "You're going back to bed, but the work can wait. Go." Emma looked like she might argue, but another coughing fit seized her, bending her nearly double. When it passed, she was shaking. Silas guided her back to the storage room and helped her lie down on the bedroll. She'd brought 2 thin blankets from home, not nearly enough for mountain winter. "I'll be right back," Silas said. He returned with 3 of his own wool blankets and his warmest quilt. He layered them over Emma, tucking them around her small frame. Then he built up the fire until the cabin was almost uncomfortably warm. The fever, he knew, could be nothing. A simple cold, but it could also be something worse. He'd watched fever take Catherine and Rebecca. He'd sat helpless as their temperatures climbed and their bodies weakened. The memory of it made his hands shake as he prepared willow bark tea. "Drink this," he said, supporting Emma's head so she could sip. "It'll help with the fever." "Tastes terrible," Emma whispered. "Medicine usually does." He spent that day the way he'd spent those terrible days 6 years ago, monitoring her temperature, making broth, keeping the fire going, changing cool cloths on her forehead when the fever spiked. But this time was different. This time he knew what he was doing. This time he had supplies and skill and the clarity of mind that comes from facing fear a second time. Emma drifted in and out of restless sleep. Sometimes she was quiet. Sometimes she murmured things he couldn't quite make out. Once in the afternoon, she called out for her mother. And once, as evening fell, she said, "Papa," in a small, confused voice before her eyes opened, and she remembered where she was. "It's all right," Silas said quietly. "I'm here." That night was the worst. The fever peaked around midnight, and Emma became delirious. She thrashed under the blankets, throwing them off, then shivering violently. Silas sat beside her bedroll, replacing the blankets, speaking in low, calm tones. "Easy now. You're safe. Just rest." "Too hot," Emma mumbled. "Can't breathe. I know. But the fever will break soon. Papa, I'm sorry." Didn't mean to drop it. Silas realized she was back in some memory, reliving something from before. He took her hot little hand in his. "It's all right," he said, playing along. "Whatever it was, it's forgiven." "The eggs," Emma said, tears leaking from her closed eyes. "Drop the basket." "Mama needed them." "Your mama understands." "Accidents happen." "Miss him," Emma whispered. "Miss Papa so much." Silas's throat tightened. "I know you do. But he'd be proud of you. So proud of how brave you've been." Emma's fingers tightened around his hand. She said something else, too quiet to hear, and then she fell into a deeper sleep. Silas sat with her all night, dozing upright in the chair he'd dragged into the storage room. Around 4 in the morning, Emma's breathing changed, became slower, easier. When he checked her forehead, the worst of the fever had broken. She was still warm, but no longer dangerously hot. Relief flooded through him so strongly that he had to grip the edge of the chair to steady himself. She would be all right. She was going to be all right. When Emma woke the next morning, weak but clear-eyed, Silas was making chicken broth from one of the hens he kept in the shed behind the cabin. "Mr. Crow." Her voice was hoarse from coughing. He brought the broth to her, helping her sit up enough to eat. "How do you feel?" "Tired, weak, but better." She managed a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her again. "I'm sorry about the work. I'll make it up." "Hush, you're not making anything up. You're a child who got sick. It happens, but you needed help. That's why I'm here, Emma." Silas set down the bowl and looked at her seriously. "The work matters, yes, but you matter more. Do you understand that?" She blinked at him, confused. "But you're not just anything. You're a person. A young person who's been through more than most adults I know. And right now your job is to rest and get better. Everything else can wait." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "Even mountain men get sick sometimes." "Even mountain men." Silas confirmed, remembering what he'd said. A small smile tugged at his mouth, especially stubborn ones who tried to do too much. He spent the next 2 days nursing Emma back to health. He made broth and tea. He read to her from the fable book when she was awake enough to listen. He told her stories about his teaching days, about students who'd struggled and persevered, about the satisfaction of watching someone learn. On the 3rd day, Emma was well enough to sit up and eat solid food. She'd wrapped herself in her mother's shawl, a faded green wool piece with fraying edges, and sat by the fire while Silas made dinner. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said. "Of course. Why did you stop teaching? Mrs. Henderson said you were very good at it." Silas was quiet for a long moment, stirring the pot of beans. He'd deflected this question before, but sitting here with Emma, this child who'd been so brave, so honest, he found he couldn't deflect any more. "I had a daughter once," he said finally. "Her name was Rebecca. She was 7 years old, bright and curious and full of life. She loved learning, loved stories." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "She died. Her mother too. Viva took them both." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "After they died, I couldn't—" Silas stopped, trying to find the right words. "I couldn't stand to be around children anymore. It hurt too much. Every child I saw reminded me of Rebecca. Every lesson I taught felt hollow without her there to share it with. So I left, came here, convinced myself I was better off alone." "Are you?" Emma asked. "Better off alone." Silas looked at her. This small girl wrapped in her mother's shawl, eyes too wise for her age, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. "No," he admitted. "I don't think I am." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then Emma spoke again. "When you were taking care of me, when I had the fever, I heard you. In my dreams, I mean. You said someone would be proud of me." "Your father would be," Silas said. "Very proud. I think Rebecca would be proud of you too," Emma said quietly. "For taking care of me. For being kind even though it hurts to remember." Something in Silas's chest cracked open, some wall he'd built 6 years ago and reinforced every day since. He felt tears prick his eyes and didn't bother to hide them. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "That means more than you know." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Silas sat alone by the fire with a rag doll in his hands. Emma had been clutching it during her fever, though she'd tried to hide it during the day. It was homemade, stitched from scraps of fabric, with button eyes and yellow yarn for hair. One arm was coming loose, and the stitching was crude but careful. Silas found his sewing kit, something he rarely used, and repaired the doll's arm with neat, small stitches. It was a simple thing, this small act of care, but it felt significant somehow. Like he was mending more than just cloth and stuffing. When Emma found the doll the next morning, arm securely reattached, she didn't say anything. She just looked at Silas across the breakfast table with such gratitude and affection that he had to look away. But he was smiling when he did it. And for the first time in 6 years, the smile felt genuine. 2 weeks into November, the first major snowstorm sealed them in completely. It started as light flurries one afternoon, and within hours had become a full blizzard. Snow fell so thick that Silas couldn't see the woodshed from the cabin window. The wind howled around the corners of the building, finding every crack and gap, making the whole structure creak and groan. Emma stood at the window, watching the white curtain of snow with wide eyes. "I've never seen it this bad. It'll last 2, maybe 3 days," Silas said. "We have enough wood and food. We'll be fine." And they were fine, but the enforced closeness of the storm changed something between them. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait out the weather, they fell into a rhythm that felt almost like family. Mornings were for reading lessons. Emma had progressed beyond the fables and was now working her way through a volume of simple poems. She still stumbled over difficult words, but her confidence had grown. She read with expression now, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the verses. "That's very good," Silas said after she finished a piece by Longfellow. "You've improved remarkably." "Because you're a good teacher," Emma said. "Better than trying to learn from Mum when she's too tired to focus. Your mother taught you the foundation. That's the hardest part. After reading came arithmetic. Silas had started using the chess pieces to teach her numbers and basic math. Each piece had a value. Pawns were worth 1, knights and bishops 3, rooks 5, queens 9. He'd set up simple problems. If you trade a knight for 3 pawns, is it a fair trade? What if you trade a rook for a knight and 2 pawns? Emma took to it like a duck to water. Her mind was quick, and she loved the puzzle aspect of it. Soon she was setting up her own problems, challenging Silas to solve them. If I have a queen and 2 pawns, and you have 2 rooks and a bishop, who's winning? She asked. Silas calculated quickly. You are, by 1 point. That's right. Emma's face lit up. Can we play a real game now? So he taught her chess. The rules at first, then the basic strategies. Emma was fascinated by how each piece moved, by the way a pawn could become a queen if it reached the other side of the board. So even the smallest, weakest piece can become the most powerful one, she asked. If it works hard enough and doesn't give up, yes. I like that, Emma said softly. The 3rd game they played, Emma actually won. It was partly because Silas made a careless mistake, distracted by the sound of the wind against the cabin, but it was also because Emma had learned to think several moves ahead. I won! She stared at the board in disbelief. I actually won! You did, Silas confirmed, unable to keep the pride from his voice. That was a clever trap you set. I didn't see it coming, Emma beamed. Then her expression turned thoughtful. Mr. Crow, can I ask you something? Always. Why do you live up here alone? I mean, I know you said it was because of your wife and daughter, but don't you ever want to be around people again? Silas considered the question carefully. A week ago he might have deflected it. But Emma had earned honesty. I was afraid, he said finally. Afraid that if I cared about anyone else, I might lose them too. So I convinced myself that being alone was safer. That if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't be hurt again. Was it safer? In a way. But it was also lonely. And loneliness, well, it's its own kind of hurt. I know, Emma said quietly. After Papa died, I used to pretend I didn't care about anything. I thought it would hurt less if I didn't let myself feel too much. But it just made everything feel grey and empty. They sat in silence for a moment. The storm raging outside, the fire crackling inside. I'm glad you're here, Silas said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. These past 2 weeks, they've been good. Better than I expected. I'm glad I'm here too, Emma said, even though I miss Mom something terrible. This place, it feels safe, like maybe things could be all right again. That afternoon, while Emma napped, she still tired easily after her illness, Silas went to the shed and found a piece of pine he'd been saving. It was smooth-grained and pale, perfect for carving. He worked on it while Emma slept, his knife moving in practiced strokes. He hadn't carved anything in years, not since he'd made the chess set, but the skill came back to him quickly. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. By evening he'd finished. It was a small bird, about the size of Emma's palm, with wings spread as if in flight. He'd carved detail into the feathers and shaped the beak to look like it was calling out. It wasn't perfect, but it was good work. When Emma woke and came out to find him putting dinner on the table, he handed her the bird without ceremony. "Made this for you," he said gruffly. "I thought you might like it." Emma took the carved bird with trembling hands. She turned it over, examining every detail, running her fingers along the smooth wings. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned. It's just a bit of whittling." "No." Emma looked up at him, her eyes shining. "It's more than that. She stopped, searching for words. "It's the first present anyone's given me since Papa died. Besides the pocket watch, I mean. But you made it. Just for me." Silas felt his throat tighten. "Do you want to give it a name?" Emma thought for a moment, then smiled. "Freedom. I'll call it Freedom. Because that's what it looks like it's doing. Flying free." They ate dinner by firelight, and Emma kept the bird on the table beside her plate, glancing at it every few minutes, as if to make sure it was still there. After dinner, Silas pulled out one of his favorite books, David Copperfield by Dickens. It was too advanced for Emma to read on her own, but he thought she might enjoy hearing it. "This is about a boy who has a very difficult childhood," Silas explained. But he perseveres and makes something of himself. Like me, Emma asked. Like you, Silas confirmed. He read for an hour, Emma curled up on the chair beside him, the carved bird clutched in one hand. She asked questions about words she didn't understand, about the customs of Victorian England, about why people behaved the way they did. Her questions were perceptive and showed she was following the story closely. When Silas finally closed the book, Emma was fighting sleep, but not quite ready to give in. "Mr. Crow," she said, her voice drowsy. "Yes. Do you think my mother would like it here? I mean, if she was well enough to see it?" Silas thought about the cabin, the books, the warmth, the quiet peace of it. "I think she might. It's a good place. A safe place. I wish she could see how much I'm learning. She always wanted me to have an education. She said knowledge was the one thing nobody could take away from you. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Emma's eyes were closing now. "When this is all over, when she's better and I've earned enough money, maybe we could find a little house in town, one with room for books, and you could visit us sometimes." The simple assumption that their connection would continue beyond this winter arrangement made Silas's heart ache. He didn't have it in him to point out all the ways that might not happen. "That sounds nice," he said quietly. Emma smiled, already half asleep. She stumbled to her storage room, still clutching the carved bird. After she'd closed the door, Silas sat alone by the dying fire. The storm had finally eased outside, the wind dropping to a murmur. In the quiet, he could hear Emma settling into her bedroll, could hear the soft sound of her breathing as she fell asleep. He picked up a knight from the chess set, the black one, carved from walnut, and turned it over in his hands. When he'd made this set, he'd been alone, carving to pass the time, to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on loss. Now he was teaching a child to play. Now he was reading stories aloud again and explaining difficult words. Now he was carving gifts and worrying about fevers and feeling his heart open in ways he'd thought impossible. It was terrifying. Every bit of affection he felt for Emma was a risk. Every moment of connection was a chance for future pain. But as he sat there in the warm cabin, listening to the peaceful sound of a child sleeping safely, Silas realized something important. He wouldn't trade it. Not for all the safety of solitude. Not for all the protection that isolation might offer, because this feeling of purpose, of being needed, of mattering to another person, this was worth the risk. Emma had asked if he'd be lonely when she left. The answer he knew now was yes. Devastatingly yes. But that didn't mean he regretted a single moment of having her here. 3 weeks had passed since Emma arrived, and the mountain winter had settled in with serious intent. The morning routine had become comfortable, almost natural. Emma rose first, started the fire, made coffee. Silas emerged from his alcove to find breakfast ready. Oatmeal or eggs or cornmeal mush, whatever they had on hand. They ate together, talking about the day ahead or the book they were reading or nothing at all. But Emma's worry about her mother had grown heavier with each passing day. Silas noticed it first in small ways. Emma would pause in her work, staring out the window at the snow-covered trail to town. She'd wrap herself in her mother's shawl more frequently, clutching the faded green wool like a lifeline. At night, he could hear her crying softly in the storage room, trying to muffle the sound so he wouldn't hear. One morning, Emma burned breakfast for the first time since arriving. The eggs were blackened in the pan, the biscuits hard as rocks. She stared at the ruined food with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about your mother," Silas finished gently. Emma nodded, unable to speak. Silas scraped the burned food into the slop bucket and started over, Emma watching miserably from the corner. When he'd made fresh eggs and salvaged some bread for toast, he sat down across from her. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "What if she's worse?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What if she needs me and I'm not there? What if—" She stopped, unable to voice the worst fear. Dr. Harrison said Mrs. Henderson is checking on her every day. But that was 3 weeks ago. What if something's changed? What if— Emma's hands twisted the edge of her mother's shawl. I can't stop thinking about her alone in that cold shanty, with nobody there at night. What if she's scared? What if she's calling for me? Silas felt the weight of her worry settle on his own shoulders. He'd been so focused on the arrangement working, on Emma being safe and fed and learning, that he hadn't fully considered the cost of separation for both mother and daughter. "We'll go check on her," he said. Emma's head snapped up. "What? As soon as the weather permits, we'll make the trip down. I'll need to get supplies anyway. We'll check on your mother, make sure she has what she needs. But the trail, there's 3 feet of snow. There's a break in the weather coming. I can feel it in my bones. Another day or two, and we'll have a window to make the trip." Hope and fear warred on Emma's face. "What if we can't make it back up? What if we get trapped in town?" "We won't. I know this mountain. I know when it's safe to travel and when it's not. We'll be careful." But the weather didn't cooperate. That afternoon, another storm rolled in. Not as fierce as the earlier blizzard, but steady and cold. The snow fell for 2 days straight, adding another foot to the already substantial accumulation. Supplies, meanwhile, were running lower than Silas had planned. He'd expected to make at least 1 trip to town by now, but the weather had made it impossible. The flour was nearly gone. They were down to their last few potatoes. The coffee was so stretched that it barely colored the water. Silas began rationing without telling Emma. He took smaller portions at meals, claiming he wasn't hungry. He ate his breakfast quickly and headed outside to chop wood before Emma could notice his half-empty plate. But Emma was observant, and she loved him too much not to notice. It was the 4th night of reduced rations when she confronted him. Silas had just finished dinner, or what passed for dinner, a thin vegetable soup and a small piece of bread, when Emma set down her spoon with a sharp click. "You're not eating enough," she said. "I'm eating plenty. You're lying." Emma's voice was firm. "You think I haven't noticed? You take smaller portions. You claim you're not hungry. But I see you, Mr. Crow. I see how thin you're getting. The supplies are just a bit tight until we can get to town. It's nothing to worry about. Then why are you the only one going hungry?" Emma pushed her bowl across the table toward him. "Here, take mine. I will not. Then I won't eat either." She crossed her arms, her jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "Emma, you took care of me when I was sick. You made sure I had enough to eat even when supplies were low. Did you think I wouldn't do the same for you?" They stared at each other across the table, locked in a standoff that was really about something deeper than food. It was about care and sacrifice, and the way love makes you willing to give up everything for another person's well-being. "We'll split everything equally," Silas said finally. "No more, no less, agreed?" "Agreed." They divided the remaining soup precisely in half and ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence. An understanding had been reached. They were in this together. That evening, Silas taught Emma the final chess strategy she needed to become a truly good player, the concept of sacrifice. How sometimes you had to give up a piece to gain a better position. How short-term loss could lead to long-term victory. "Like food," Emma said quietly. "What?" "Sacrificing, like you were doing with the food. Giving up something now because you thought it would help later. That's different." "That was foolish." "No," Emma said. It was love. The word hung in the air between them. Silas had avoided it even in his own thoughts. But Emma had said it plainly, without embarrassment or hesitation. "Love. Your move," Silas said gruffly. Not trusting himself to respond to that, Emma studied the board, then moved her queen into a seemingly vulnerable position. "Check." Silas looked at the board in surprise. She'd set a trap, sacrificing her queen to force a checkmate in 3 moves. It was brilliant. "Where did you learn that?" "You taught me." "About sacrifice, about thinking ahead," she smiled. "I've been practicing in my head at night when I can't sleep." Silas made his best defensive move, but Emma had already won. 3 moves later, his king was trapped. "I believe that's checkmate," Emma said softly. "So it is." Silas sat back, looking at this child who'd beaten him fairly at a game he'd been playing for 30 years. "You're a remarkable student, Emma." "I have a remarkable teacher." They reset the board and played again, and this time Silas didn't hold back at all. Emma lost, but she played well, and more importantly, she understood why she lost. She could see the moves she should have made, the opportunities she'd missed. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said as they were putting the pieces away. "Of course. When I leave, when Mum gets better and we go back to our own place, will you be lonely again?" It was the question she'd asked before, but this time Silas answered with complete honesty. "Yes," he said, "very lonely. But that doesn't mean I regret having you here. These weeks with you, they've been some of the best of my life. You've reminded me what it means to care about someone, to have purpose, to feel alive instead of just existing." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I wish you could come with us. I wish we could all live together, you and me and Mom." "That would be nice," Silas said, though he knew it was an impossible wish. A single man living with a widow and her daughter. The town would never accept it. The scandal would hurt Emma's reputation and her mother's dignity, but the fact that Emma wanted it, that she could imagine a future where they remained a family, that meant more than Silas could put into words. That night, wrapped in her mother's shawl, Emma asked one more question before going to bed. "Mr. Crow, if something happens to Mum, if she doesn't get better, would you—" She couldn't finish, but Silas understood what she was asking. "If anything happens," he said carefully, "you won't be alone. I promise you that." Emma nodded, satisfied, and closed the door to her room. Silas sat by the fire long into the night, watching the flames dance and thinking about promises, about a child who'd walked into his life carrying a flour sack and her mother's recipes, about how completely she'd changed everything. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake adding to the barrier between the mountain and the town, between the present and whatever future awaited them all. 4 weeks into December, the sound Silas had been dreading finally came, a knock at the door, urgent, insistent. It was mid-afternoon, during one of Emma's reading lessons. She looked up from her book, her face going pale. Visitors to the cabin were rare enough that any knock meant something important, something wrong. Silas opened the door to find Dr. Harrison standing on the porch, his face red from exertion and cold. He'd made the climb on snowshoes, a dangerous journey in these conditions. "Dr. Harrison." Silas stepped back to let the older man inside. "What's happened?" Emma was already on her feet, her book forgotten. "Is it Mom?" Dr. Harrison pulled off his snow-covered coat and hat, his expression grave. He looked at Emma with such compassion that Silas knew, even before the words came, what the doctor was going to say. "Emma, child, I'm so sorry." Dr. Harrison knelt down to be at her level. "Your mother passed 3 days ago." Peacefully in her sleep, Mrs. Henderson was with her at the end. The words seemed to hang in the air, impossible to absorb. Emma stood frozen, her face blank with shock. "No," she said quietly. "No, that's not right." She was getting better. The medicine, there was no medicine that could help her child. The consumption was too far advanced. She'd been sick a long time, hiding it so you wouldn't worry. But I was supposed to earn money for medicine. That's why I came here, to help her get better. Emma's voice was rising, panic creeping in. "I can still do that. If I work longer, if I earn more." "Emma," Silas crossed to her, putting his hands on her shoulders. "I'm so sorry." The reality of it hit her then. Her mother was gone, really truly gone. Emma's face crumpled, and a sound came out of her, a wail of grief so profound that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her small body could contain. Silas gathered her into his arms as she sobbed, her whole body shaking with the force of it. He held her while she cried, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head, murmuring things that probably made no sense, but seemed to help anyway. Dr. Harrison waited, his own eyes damp. When Emma's sobs had quieted to hiccups and shudders, he spoke again. "There's more you need to know," he said gently. "About Emma's situation." Silas looked up from where he knelt holding Emma. "What do you mean?" "Emma has no other family. Her father's people are all dead or scattered. Her mother's family disowned her when she married beneath her station. There's no one to take the child." Emma lifted her face from Silas's shoulder. "What happens to me?" Dr. Harrison exchanged a glance with Silas before answering. The county will take responsibility for you, Emma. They'll place you in an orphanage in Denver. It's not a bad place. The children are fed and clothed and— No. Emma's voice was small but firm. I don't want to go to an orphanage. I understand, child. But it's the law. Children without families go to the county homes. When? Silas asked, his arms still around Emma. The county agent will come when the spring thaw makes travel possible. March, probably. April at the latest. Dr. Harrison pulled an envelope from his coat. Your mother left this letter. She wrote it in her final days. Asked me to make sure Emma got it. Emma took the letter with trembling hands, but didn't open it. She just stared at the familiar handwriting on the envelope, her mother's careful script. Dr. Harrison stood slowly, his knees creaking. I brought supplies, food, coffee, flour, enough to see you through to spring. And I brought your mother's things, Emma. The few belongings she had, they're in the pack outside. Thank you, Silas managed. His mind was racing, trying to process everything. Emma's mother dead, Emma facing an orphanage. And something else the doctor had said, something about the letter, Dr. Harrison, Silas said. You mentioned Emma's mother wrote in her final days. Did she say anything else? About Emma coming here? The doctor paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. She said quite a bit, actually. Toward the end, when she knew she was dying, she talked a lot about you, Mr. Crow. About me? We barely knew each other. She knew you better than you think. Dr. Harrison turned back to face them. Mary Hartley was an educated woman. Did you know that? She grew up in Boston, daughter of a professor. She'd read all the same books you have on your shelves. She used to come into town just to stand in the general store and read the spines of the books Fletcher kept for sale. Emma lifted her head. Mom never told me that. Your mother was a private person. But in those final weeks, she talked to me. She told me how she'd watched Mr. Crow during his monthly visits to town, how she'd seen a man who was clearly educated, clearly grieving, clearly lost. She said he reminded her of her father, a teacher and a scholar who loved books more than most people. Silas felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying your mother sent you here deliberately, Emma. Dr. Harrison looked at the girl with gentle honesty. She knew she was dying. She knew she couldn't care for you much longer. And she knew the county would take you if she didn't find another option. She sent me to Mr. Crow on purpose. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. She did. She told me she'd been watching him for months, trying to decide if he was the kind of man who could be trusted with a child. When she saw that notice he posted, she knew it was her chance. She was too sick to go herself, of course. But she knew if she sent you, brave, capable you, that Mr. Crow wouldn't have the heart to turn you away. The revelation settled over the room like fresh snow. Emma had been sent here. Her arrival had been orchestrated by a dying mother's desperate hope. She was matchmaking, Silas said quietly. From beyond the grave, she was saving her daughter, Dr. Harrison corrected. She believed that if Emma spent time with you, if you got to know each other, you might— He stopped, seeming to search for the right words. She hoped you might want to keep Emma, to raise her as your own. But I'm just a man living alone on a mountain. I have no legal right to— You were a teacher, a respectable professional who chose a different life. You have references, credentials. If you wanted to petition the county for guardianship, you'd have a case. Dr. Harrison pulled on his coat. Mary believed in you, Mr. Crow. She believed you were a good man who'd lost his way but could find it again. She believed you'd love Emma if you gave yourself the chance. Silas looked down at Emma, still curled against his chest. Her eyes were red from crying, her face blotchy and swollen. But she was looking at him with something like hope. She was right, Emma said softly. You did find your way, and you do love me, don't you? The question was so direct, so trusting, that Silas couldn't do anything but tell the truth. Yes, he said, I love you very much. Then don't let them take me away. Emma's hands clutched his shirt. Please, I know I'm not Rebecca. I know I can't replace her. But we could. You're not replacing anyone, Silas said firmly. You're Emma. You're your own person. And yes, I love you. But adoption, guardianship, it's complicated. I'm an unmarried man. The county might not, but you'll try." Emma's voice was desperate. "You'll at least try." Silas looked at Dr. Harrison, who was watching them both with a mixture of sadness and hope. "What would I need to do?" Silas asked. "Petition the county. Provide evidence of your character and your ability to provide for a child. Get letters of recommendation from people who knew you before. Show that you can offer Emma a stable home, an education, a future." Dr. Harrison opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. "I'll testify on your behalf if it comes to that. I'll tell them what Mary wanted, but the decision will ultimately be up to Judge Ashford when he comes to review Emma's case in the spring." After the doctor left, Silas and Emma sat by the fire. Emma held her mother's letter but still hadn't opened it. She was crying quietly, tears running down her face in steady streams. "Read it," Silas said gently. "Your mother wanted you to have those words." With shaking hands, Emma opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The handwriting was shaky but legible, written by someone who was very ill but determined to say what needed to be said. Emma read aloud, her voice breaking. "My dearest Emma, my brave girl. If you're reading this, then I have already gone to be with your father. I'm so sorry to leave you. Sorry you have to face this alone. But you're not alone, my darling. I made sure of that. I sent you to Silas Crow because I believed he was a good man who needed saving as much as you needed a protector. I watched him for months, this sad, lonely man with kind eyes and careful hands. I saw how gentle he was with the Fletcher children when they bothered him in the store, how he always held doors for the elderly, how he treated everyone with respect, even as he held himself apart. I knew he'd been a teacher. I knew he'd lost his family. And I just knew in my heart that you two needed each other. By now, if my plan worked, you've spent time together. You've cooked and read and talked. You've become friends, maybe even family. If so, then I died peacefully knowing you were loved and safe. Emma, you are the best thing I ever did in this world. You are smart and brave and kind. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. And don't ever forget that your father and I loved you more than life itself. Be good to Mr. Crow. He's hurting just like you are. Help each other heal. Make a family together if you can. I love you forever and always, my sweet girl. Your mother, Mary Hartley." When Emma finished reading, she folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. She looked at Silas with tears still streaming down her face. "She knew," Emma whispered. "She knew we'd love each other." "She was a very wise woman," Silas said, his own voice thick with emotion. Emma crawled into his lap like the child she still was, and Silas held her while she grieved. Outside, night was falling. The mountains were dark against the darkening sky, and inside the warm cabin, two people who'd been alone in the world clung to each other and tried to figure out how to face whatever came. Next, the days after Dr. Harrison's visit were the hardest Emma had ever known. Grief moved through her in waves, sometimes gentle, like a quiet ache in her chest, and sometimes fierce, crashing over her with such force that she could barely breathe. Silas stayed close, holding her when she needed to be held, giving her space when she needed to be alone, never trying to hurry her through it. "Grief has its own timeline," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "You can't rush it. You just have to let it move through you." "Did you do that?" Emma asked. "When your wife and daughter died?" "No," Silas admitted. "I ran from it, buried myself up here and pretended I didn't feel anything. That's why it took 6 years for me to start healing. You're braver than I was. You're facing it head on." Emma didn't feel brave. She felt hollowed out and exhausted. But she appreciated Silas's words anyway. 3 days after learning of her mother's death, Emma finally felt ready to talk about the future. She'd been thinking about it constantly, about the orphanage, about Judge Ashford, about the possibility of staying with Silas. "We need a plan," she said at breakfast, her voice steady despite the red rim around her eyes. "For when the judge comes," Silas set down his coffee cup. "We do. What do we need to prove? That we should be allowed to stay together?" "Several things. That I'm of good character, that I can provide for you financially, that you're thriving under my care." That adoption, or guardianship at least, would be in your best interest. I am thriving, Emma said firmly. I can read now. I can do arithmetic. I'm healthy and fed and, her voice cracked slightly, and I'm loved. That has to count for something. It does. It counts for everything. Over the next week, Silas began preparing his case. He wrote to his former colleagues in Pennsylvania, the headmaster who'd hired him, the other teachers he'd worked with, the minister of the church he'd attended. He wrote to the publisher who'd printed several of his scholarly articles years ago. He even wrote to the mayor of the town where he'd taught, asking for character references. He explained his situation honestly. He was seeking to adopt an orphaned child who'd come to work for him and had become like a daughter. He needed testimony that he was a man of sound judgment and moral character, capable of providing a good home. Emma watched him write these letters, her hope growing with each one. What if they don't remember you? She asked. It's been 6 years. Then they don't remember me and we find another way. Silas sealed another envelope, but I think they will. I wasn't always a hermit, Emma. I was a good teacher, a good colleague. People respected me once. I have to hope that counts for something. While Silas worked on character references, Emma worked on herself. She practiced her reading every day, pushing herself to tackle more difficult texts. She memorized poems and mathematical formulas. She wrote out examples of her penmanship and solved arithmetic problems to show her progress. I want to prove I'm learning, she explained to Silas. That living here is making me better, not worse. You don't have to prove anything, Silas said gently. Yes, I do. They'll think I'm just a mountain man's servant. They need to see that I'm getting an education, that you're teaching me. So Silas helped her prepare a portfolio of her work. They bound her best writing samples and arithmetic problems in a folder made from leather scraps. They selected passages she could read aloud to demonstrate her progress. They rehearsed answers to questions she might be asked. But there was another issue that needed addressing, one that Silas had been avoiding. I can't provide for you properly from up here, he said one evening. Not long term. I have some savings, but they won't last forever. If I'm going to be your guardian, I need steady income. You could teach again, Emma suggested. You're so good at it. I'd have to leave the mountain, move to town. Emma looked around the cabin, at the books, the chess set, the carved bird that sat on the shelf like a talisman. Would that be so terrible? Silas was quiet for a long moment. 2 months ago, the idea of leaving this place, of returning to society, would have been unthinkable. But now, sitting here with Emma, he realized the mountain had stopped being a refuge and had become a prison, one he'd built for himself out of grief and fear. No, he said finally, it wouldn't be terrible. It might even be good. Then we could both go to school, Emma said, her eyes brightening. You could teach and I could learn. We could have a little house in town, and you could visit your books whenever you wanted, and she stopped herself, not wanting to assume too much. But Silas smiled at her enthusiasm. Let's take it one step at a time, he said. First we convince Judge Ashford. Then we figure out the rest. The following week, Silas made the journey down to town. The trail was still difficult, but the weather had cleared enough to make travel possible. He went alone, leaving Emma at the cabin with strict instructions to keep the fire going and not to go outside except to use the privy. In town, Silas sought out the people who might support his case. He spoke with Dr. Harrison, who agreed to testify about Mary's wishes and Emma's improved health. He spoke with Mrs. Henderson, who'd cared for Mary in her final days and could attest to the dying woman's intentions. He spoke with Fletcher at the general store, who remembered Silas as a quiet but reliable customer. Most importantly, he spoke with the mayor of Timber Ridge about the teaching position that had been vacant since spring. We've been looking for a qualified teacher for months, Mayor Simmons said. But no one wants to come out here. Too remote. If you're interested, Mr. Crow, the job is yours. We can't pay much, but there's a small house that comes with the position, and I'll take it, Silas said. On one condition. I'm in the process of adopting a child, an 8-year-old girl. If that becomes official, she'll be living with me. Mayor Simmons raised an eyebrow. That's quite a change from your usual solitary existence. It is. But it's a change I want to make. Well, I can't see how it would be a problem. A school teacher with a child of his own might even be a benefit. Shows you understand children. The mayor extended his hand. We'll have the house ready by spring. You can start teaching when the summer term begins. Silas shook his hand, feeling something loosen in his chest. It wasn't certain yet. Emma's guardianship still had to be approved, but it was a start. It was a plan. It was a future they could work toward. When Silas returned to the cabin that evening, arms loaded with mail and supplies, Emma met him at the door with anxious eyes. What happened? Silas set down his burdens and grinned at her. I got us a job. A job? Teaching position in Timber Ridge. Starts in summer. Comes with a house. Emma's face lit up like sunrise. Really? We can live in town? Together? If Judge Ashford approves the guardianship, yes. She threw her arms around his waist, hugging him fiercely. He will. He has to. We belong together now. Silas hugged her back, hoping desperately that she was right. Over the next few weeks, responses to Silas's letters began arriving. The replies were better than he dared hope. His former headmaster wrote a glowing reference. 3 of his teaching colleagues sent letters describing him as dedicated, compassionate, and excellent with children. The minister wrote about Silas's devotion to his family and his moral character. Even the publisher sent a note mentioning Silas's scholarly work and intellectual rigor. Emma read each letter aloud, her voice filled with pride. They all think you're wonderful. They knew a different version of me. A version from before. Maybe that version is coming back, Emma said quietly. Maybe it was. Silas certainly felt different than he had 3 months ago. He felt alive again, purposeful, connected to something beyond his own grief. But there was still the matter of the hearing. Judge Ashford wouldn't arrive until the spring thaw, which meant weeks more of waiting. Weeks of uncertainty. Weeks of trying not to think about Emma being taken away to Denver to keep their minds occupied. They fell into a rhythm of preparation and learning. Silas taught Emma not just reading and arithmetic now, but history and geography. He taught her about the solar system and the branches of government and the works of the great poets. Emma absorbed it all like parched ground absorbing rain. In the evenings, they worked on something else, creating a presentation for the judge. Emma wrote an essay about what home meant to her. It was simple but powerful, describing how home wasn't a building, but a feeling of safety and belonging. How it was found in shared meals and bedtime stories, and someone who cared when you were sick. Home is where someone knows your favorite book, she wrote. Where someone teaches you things because they want you to grow. Where someone holds you when you cry and celebrates when you succeed. Home is where you're loved, not because you're perfect, but because you're you. Silas read the essay with tears in his eyes. This is beautiful, Emma. Is it good enough? Will it convince the judge? If it doesn't convince him, then his heart is made of stone. As February turned to March, the snow began to melt. First in small patches where the sun hit strongest, then in larger swathes as the days grew longer and warmer. The trail to town, impassable for months, started to clear, and with the clearing came a message from Dr. Harrison. Judge Ashford would arrive in Timber Ridge in 1 week to review Emma's case. The news hit them both with the force of reality. This was it, the moment that would determine their future. 1 week, Emma said, her voice small. That's not very long. It's long enough to be ready. Silas knelt in front of her. Emma, listen to me. No matter what happens, no matter what the judge decides, you are loved. You are valued. You matter. Do you understand? But what if he says no? What if he takes me away? Then I'll fight it. I'll appeal his decision. I'll do everything in my power to bring you home. He took her hands. But I need you to be brave one more time. I need you to show Judge Ashford exactly who you are, this smart, courageous, remarkable girl. Can you do that? Emma straightened her shoulders. I can do that. The final days passed in a blur of preparation. They packed their belongings. They cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, leaving it ready for Silas's eventual return, or for whoever might use it next. They rehearsed Emma's presentation until she could recite it from memory without stumbling. On the evening before they were to leave for town, Silas pulled out the teaching certificate from his trunk. It was yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. Silas Thaddeus Crowe, certified to teach literature, history, and classical studies to students ages 6 through 18. "This is who I was," he said, showing it to Emma. "This is who I'll be again." "For you," Emma touched the certificate gently. "You're a good man, Mr. Crowe. The judge will see that." "I hope so." That night, neither of them slept well. Silas lay in his alcove listening to Emma toss and turn in the storage room. Around midnight, he heard her crying softly. He rose and tapped gently on her door. "Emma, may I come in?" "Yes." He found her sitting up on her bedroll, wrapped in her mother's shawl, clutching both her rag doll and the carved wooden bird. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. Silas sat down beside her. "Want to tell me what you're thinking?" "I'm scared," Emma admitted. "What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm not good enough? What if—" "Stop!" Silas put his arm around her shoulders. "You are more than good enough. You are extraordinary. Tomorrow, you walk into that hearing, and you show them exactly who you are. You read your essay. You answer their questions honestly. And you remember that no matter what, you have already succeeded at the hardest thing. What's that? Surviving, growing, loving again after loss." He pulled her closer. "You've already done the impossible, Emma. Tomorrow is just paperwork." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Will you stay with me? Just until I fall asleep?" "Of course." Silas sat with her, humming a lullaby his mother used to sing to him, until Emma's breathing deepened and she finally drifted off. He carefully laid her down and tucked the blankets around her, then returned to his own alcove. But sleep wouldn't come. Silas lay awake, watching the moonlight move across the ceiling, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. Emma walking up the mountain with her flour sack, her fever, the chess games, the carved bird, Mary's letter revealing her plan, and now this, a chance to make it official, to make their family real in the eyes of the law. He thought about his daughter Rebecca, about how she would have been 15 now if she'd lived, about how he'd thought his chance at fatherhood had died with her. But here was Emma, brave and bright and desperately in need of someone to love her. And here was Silas, finally ready to step back into the world and be the man he'd once been, the man he could still be. Morning came too quickly. They rose early, ate a simple breakfast neither of them could taste, and packed the last of their things. Emma wore her best dress, the one Mrs. Henderson had sent up with Dr. Harrison, clean and mended. Silas wore his only suit, brushed free of dust and carefully pressed. Emma put her carved bird in her pocket for luck. She folded her mother's letter and tucked it in with her essay. She took one last look around the cabin that had been her home for 3 months. "Ready?" Silas asked. Emma took a deep breath. "Ready?" They stepped out into the bright March morning. The snow was melting in earnest now, creating small streams that ran down the mountainside. Birds called from the trees, the first signs of spring. The air smelled of wet earth and pine and possibility. Silas locked the cabin door and pocketed the key. Then he held out his hand to Emma. She took it, her small fingers wrapping around his larger ones, and together they began the walk down the mountain toward whatever future awaited them. The walk to Timber Ridge took 3 hours, and with each step closer to town, Emma's grip on Silas's hand grew tighter. They arrived just after midday to find the town buzzing with activity. Word had spread about the hearing. In a small town, news traveled fast, and an orphan's custody case was the most interesting thing to happen in months. People stopped their work to watch as Silas and Emma walked down Main Street toward the town hall. Some faces were friendly. Mrs. Henderson waved from the hotel porch. Fletcher nodded from his store. Dr. Harrison met them on the street and walked with them the rest of the way, offering quiet encouragement. But other faces were skeptical. Silas could see it in their expressions, doubt that a hermit from the mountain could properly raise a child, concerned that an unmarried man living with a young girl would invite scandal, curiosity about why someone who'd shunned society for 6 years suddenly wanted to rejoin it. Emma saw those looks too. She lifted her chin higher and squeezed Silas's hand. "They don't know us," she whispered. They don't know what we are to each other." "No," Silas agreed. "But they'll learn." The town hall was a simple wooden building that served as courtroom, meeting space, and occasional church. Inside, chairs had been set up in rows facing a raised platform, where Judge Cornelius Ashford would preside. The judge hadn't arrived yet, but already 24 townspeople had gathered to watch the proceedings. Also present was a thin man in a dark suit, the county representative, Mr. Blackwell, who would argue for Emma's placement in the Denver orphanage. He looked at Emma with what might have been pity or simply professional detachment. "The judge will be here shortly," he said to Silas. "In the meantime, the girl will need to wait with Mrs. Henderson. It's protocol. She can't stay with you until after the hearing." "No!" The word came out more forcefully than Silas intended. "She stays with me?" "Sir, it's standard procedure. She stays with me," Silas repeated. "Or I walk out that door right now, and you'll have to send the sheriff up the mountain to get us?" Mr. Blackwell looked like he might argue, but Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Let the child stay with Mr. Crow until the judge arrives. She's frightened enough as it is." "There's no harm in a few more minutes together," the county representative relented with obvious reluctance. Silas and Emma sat together in the front row, her hand still firmly in his. Around them the crowd murmured and speculated. "Did you hear he lived up there alone for 6 years? Strange man, if you ask me. Not natural, but the girl looks healthy enough. Better than when her mother was alive, some say. Still, an unmarried man and a child. It doesn't look right." Emma's face flushed, but Silas leaned close and whispered, "Don't listen to them. The only opinion that matters is Judge Ashford's." At precisely 1 o'clock, Judge Cornelius Ashford entered the town hall. He was in his 60s, with iron-grey hair and a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime making difficult decisions. He wore his robes and carried an air of authority that silenced the room immediately. "This hearing will come to order," he said, taking his seat behind the raised desk. "We are here to determine the guardianship of one Emma Louise Hartley, age 8, recently orphaned. Mr. Blackwell, you may present the county's position." The county representative stood. "Your Honor, the matter is quite straightforward. Miss Hartley has no living relatives and no legal guardian. County law is clear in such cases. The child should be placed in the appropriate institution where she can receive proper care and education. The Denver County Home for Children is a well-run facility that has successfully placed numerous orphans." "I'm not numerous," Emma said suddenly, her voice clear in the quiet room. "I'm Emma." Judge Ashford's eyes moved to her with interest. "The young lady will have an opportunity to speak shortly. Mr. Blackwell, continue. As I was saying, Your Honor, the county home is the appropriate placement. Mr. Crow, while I'm sure he means well, is an unmarried man with no experience raising children. He lives in isolation on a mountain. He has been, by all accounts, a recluse for the past 6 years. This is not a suitable environment for a young girl." "Mr. Crow," the judge said, "you wish to contest this placement?" Silas stood, his heart hammering. "I do, Your Honor." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Emma has been living with me for 3 months and has thrived. On the grounds that her mother specifically wanted me to care for her. On the grounds that we have formed a family, and separating us would cause irreparable harm to a child who has already lost too much." Judge Ashford leaned back in his chair. "Those are significant claims, Mr. Crow. I hope you can support them with evidence." "I can, Your Honor." "Very well. We'll begin with character witnesses. Who speaks for you?" Dr. Harrison stood. "I do, Your Honor." And so the hearing began in earnest. Dr. Harrison testified about Mary Hartley's final wishes, about how she had deliberately sent Emma to Silas, believing he was a good man who could provide for her daughter. He testified about Emma's improved health, about the care Silas had shown during her illness. Mrs. Henderson followed, describing Mary's reasoning in her final days. She spoke of the dying woman's relief that Emma was safe on the mountain, her faith that Silas Crow would prove worthy of that trust. Fletcher testified about Silas's character as a customer, always honest, always respectful. clearly educated and intelligent despite his chosen isolation. Mayor Simmons testified about offering Silas the teaching position, about his qualifications and the town's need for an educator. Then came the letters from Pennsylvania. Judge Ashford read each one carefully. The headmaster's glowing reference, the colleagues' testimonials, the minister's character statement. With each letter, the judge's expression shifted subtly, from skepticism towards something like consideration. Finally, Mr. Blackwell called his only witness, a representative from the orphanage itself, a stern woman named Mrs. Pritchard, who described the facilities and programs available to children in their care. It was competent testimony, but cold. She spoke of dormitories and schedules and regulations, never once mentioning love or family or belonging. When she finished, Judge Ashford looked at Emma. "Young lady, I'd like to hear from you now. Would you approach the bench, please?" Emma stood on shaking legs. Silas gave her hand one final squeeze before releasing it. She walked to the front of the room, so small that she barely reached the top of the judge's desk. "Don't be frightened," Judge Ashford said, his voice gentler than it had been. "I just want to ask you a few questions. Can you tell me your full name?" "Emma Louise Hartley, sir. And how old are you, Emma?" 8 years old. "Died in June. I understand you've been living with Mr. Crow on his mountain for several months. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. 3 months and 1 week. Tell me about that. What's it like living up there?" Emma took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "It's quiet up there, peaceful. At first I was scared. I'd never been so far from town, and Mr. Crow was a stranger. But he was kind to me from the very first day." "Kind in what way?" "He made sure I had enough to eat. He gave me blankets when I was cold. When I got sick with fever, he stayed up all night taking care of me. He taught me to read better and how to do arithmetic. He carved me a bird." Emma pulled the wooden bird from her pocket and held it up. "He made this for me because he wanted me to know I mattered." Judge Ashford examined the carved bird with interest. "That's fine workmanship. Mr. Crow, you made this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Silas said from his seat. "You're clearly a man of some skill and education. Why did you choose to live as a hermit?" Silas stood. "I lost my wife and daughter to fever 6 years ago, Your Honor. I couldn't bear to be around people anymore. Every child reminded me of what I'd lost. So I ran away. I convinced myself I was better off alone. But I was wrong. What changed your mind?" "Emma changed my mind. She showed me that loving someone again doesn't dishonor the people we've lost. It honors them. My daughter Rebecca would want me to live fully, to care for others, to use the gifts I have. Emma helped me remember that." Judge Ashford nodded slowly, then turned back to Emma. "Do you want to stay with Mr. Crow? If I gave you the choice between living with him or going to the county home in Denver, what would you choose?" "I'd choose Mr. Crow," Emma said without hesitation. "He's not just someone who takes care of me. He's my family now. We take care of each other. But the county home would offer you opportunities, other children to play with, structured education, eventual placement with a family." "I already have a family," Emma interrupted. "And I already have education. Mr. Crow is a better teacher than anyone at the county home could be. He's teaching me Latin and astronomy and Shakespeare. He treats me like I'm smart enough to understand difficult things. He believes in me. What about when you're older? A young woman needs a mother figure, someone to guide her through. My mother sent me to Mr. Crow because she trusted him to raise me right. She knew he'd teach me and protect me and love me. She chose him for me." Emma's voice grew stronger. "I know I'm just a child, and you're a judge, and you know more about the law than I do. But I know about love, and I know that Mr. Crow loves me the way a father loves a daughter. That's what my mother wanted. That's what I want." "You're very articulate for an 8-year-old, Judge Ashford observed. "Mr. Crow taught me big words," Emma said. "He says words are power. He says if you can speak clearly and think clearly, nobody can take advantage of you. Wise advice." The judge looked at her carefully. "I understand you wrote an essay about what home means to you. Would you read it for us?" Emma's hands shook as she pulled the folded paper from her pocket. But when she began to read, her voice was steady and clear. "Home is not a building made of wood and nails. Home is not a place you can find on a map. Home is where someone knows your favorite book and reads it to you even when they're tired. Home is where someone teaches you because they want you to grow, not because it's their job. Home is where someone holds you when you cry about your mother and doesn't tell you to stop grieving. Home is where someone gives you a carved bird to remind you that you can be free and safe at the same time. Home is where you're loved not because you're perfect or because you do everything right, but because you're you. I found my home on a mountain with a man who was so sad he forgot how to live. And somehow, by being together, we both remembered. He taught me that losing someone doesn't mean you stop loving, and I taught him that loving again doesn't mean you forget. That's what home is. It's two people who needed each other finding each other just in time. When Emma finished reading, the room was silent. Several people in the audience were wiping their eyes. Even Mr. Blackwell looked moved, though he tried to hide it. Judge Ashford cleared his throat. "That's a very powerful essay, Emma. Thank you for sharing it." He looked at Silas. "Mr. Crow, if I grant you guardianship, what are your plans?" "You can't raise a child in isolation on a mountain." Silas stood again. "I've accepted a teaching position here in Timber Ridge, Your Honor. It starts this summer and comes with a house in town. Emma will attend school with the other children. We'll be part of the community. I'm done running from life, and if at some point Emma proves difficult to manage, if raising a child becomes more challenging than you anticipated, then I'll figure it out the way any parent does. I'm not promising perfection, Your Honor. I'm promising commitment. I'm promising love. And I'm promising that Emma will never wonder if she matters, if she's wanted, if she's home." Judge Ashford was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Emma, then at Silas, then at the assembled crowd. Finally he spoke. "I've presided over many custody cases in my career. I've seen children placed in institutions, with distant relatives, with foster families. Some placements work beautifully. Others are disasters. The law provides guidelines, but ultimately, my job is to determine what serves the child's best interest." He paused, and Emma felt her heart stop. In this case, the answer is clear. Emma Hartley has already found her home. Her mother, in her wisdom, chose well. And Mr. Crow has proven himself willing to rejoin society and provide not just shelter, but genuine family. Therefore, I grant temporary guardianship to Silas Crow, with a 6-month probationary period. At the end of that time, if all is well, we'll finalize the adoption. Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Had she heard correctly? "Mr. Crow, you may approach." Silas walked forward on unsteady legs. "Take care of this child," Judge Ashford said quietly. "She's special. Don't waste the gift you've been given." "I won't, Your Honor, I promise." The judge looked at Emma. "Welcome to your new family, Miss Hartley. Or should I say Miss Crow?" Emma burst into tears, great heaving sobs of relief and joy. Silas was beside her in an instant, kneeling down to wrap her in his arms. The courtroom erupted in applause, though Emma barely heard it through her crying. "We did it," she whispered against his shoulder. "We're a family." "We are," Silas said, his own voice thick with emotion. "We're a family." 3 months later, on a warm June afternoon, Emma stood in front of the small house that would be their home. It wasn't grand, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it had windows that let in the light, and a little garden plot out back where vegetables were already starting to grow. Most importantly, it had bookshelves that Silas had built himself, now filled with the volumes they'd brought down from the mountain cabin. "What do you think?" Silas asked, watching her face. "I think it's perfect," Emma said. They'd moved to town in April, shortly after the hearing. The transition had been strange at first. After months of mountain solitude, the noise and activity of Timber Ridge felt overwhelming. But gradually they'd adapted. Silas had prepared his classroom and curriculum. Emma had met the other children who would be her classmates come fall. They'd attended church socials and town meetings, slowly becoming part of the community. The probationary period Judge Ashford had mandated was nearly half over, and everything was going well. Better than well. They'd found their rhythm as a family, learning each other's habits and needs, settling into a life that felt both new and somehow inevitable. This morning, they'd made a special trip. The cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking town, shaded by cottonwood trees. They visited two sets of graves. First, Mary Hartley's. Emma had placed wildflowers, columbines and Indian paintbrush on her mother's headstone. She'd knelt there for a long time, telling her mother about everything that had happened, about the hearing and the house and her new life. "I miss you every day," Emma had said quietly. "But I'm happy, Mama. I'm safe and loved just like you wanted. Mr. Crow takes good care of me." "You chose right." Then they'd walk to the other side of the cemetery, to where Catherine and Rebecca Crow lay buried. Silas had stood there in silence for a long moment before speaking. "I brought someone to meet you," he'd said to the graves. "Her name is Emma. She's going to be my daughter now, legally, officially. I hope that's all right with you both." Emma had taken his hand, not saying anything, just standing with him in shared grief and remembrance. "I'll never forget you," Silas had continued, his voice rough. "But I'm going to live again. Really live, the way you would have wanted me to, the way Rebecca would have wanted for me." As they'd walked back down the hill, Emma had asked, "Do you think they are happy for us, your wife and daughter?" "I think they are," Silas had said. "I think they want us both to be happy." Now, standing in front of their new home, Emma felt the truth of that. Her mother and Silas's first family, they weren't lost or forgotten. They were honored by the life that continued, by the love that persisted, by two people who'd found each other in grief and built something beautiful from it. "Papa," Emma said suddenly. Silas looked at her in surprise. "What did you say?" "Papa, that's what I want to call you. Is that all right?" His eyes filled with tears. "It's more than all right." Emma had called him Papa once before in her fever delirium. But this was different. This was a choice, made deliberately and with full awareness of what it meant. "Then come on, Papa," Emma said, taking his hand. "Let's go inside. I want to unpack my books." That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Silas and Emma sat on their front porch. Emma was reading. She was up to chapter books now, losing herself in stories of adventure and faraway places. Silas was grading papers for his upcoming classes, making notes in the margins. A photographer from Denver had come through town that afternoon, offering portraits to any family who wanted them. Silas had commissioned one, their first official family photograph. They'd posed in front of the house, Emma holding her carved wooden bird, Silas holding a chess piece. The photographer had captured something real, a man and a girl, bound by choice and love rather than blood, looking at each other with genuine affection. "When will the photograph be ready?" Emma asked, setting down her book. 2 weeks. He'll send it by mail. Can we frame it? Put it on the mantel next to the picture of your first family?" "I think that's a fine idea." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. A neighbor walked by and waved. Emma waved back. 6 months ago, she wouldn't have known these people. Now they were part of her world. The butcher who always saved her a treat, the seamstress who was teaching her to sew, the children who'd become her friends. "Papa?" Emma said after a while. Are you happy?" Silas set down his papers and looked at her, really looked at her. This brave, bright girl who'd walked up a mountain with nothing but a flour sack and changed his entire life. Who taught him that hearts could heal, and love could return, and family could be chosen. "More than I ever thought possible," he said honestly. "You?" "Me too," Emma smiled. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't gone up that mountain. If I'd been too scared. If you'd turned me away. But you weren't scared, and I didn't turn you away, because we needed each other. Because we needed each other," Silas agreed. As the sun set fully and the stars began to appear, Emma moved from her chair to sit beside Silas. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned against him, safe and content. On the mantel inside, Emma's flour sack sat displayed like the treasure it was, a reminder of where they'd started. Beside it was the pocket watch Silas had given her, still broken but still meaningful. And soon the photograph would join them, creating a record of their journey from strangers to family. The mountain cabin sat empty now, waiting for Silas's occasional visits. But it no longer felt like home. Home was here, in this small house in town, with this child who called him Papa and this life they were building together. Emma yawned, fighting sleep, but not quite ready to go inside. "One more chapter?" she asked hopefully. "One more chapter," Silas agreed, picking up her book. He read aloud while the stars came out one by one, his voice steady and warm. Emma listened, her eyes drifting closed, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would come with breakfast and lessons and all the small, ordinary moments that made up a family life. Sometimes, Silas thought as he read, the people who save us really do come in the smallest packages. Sometimes a child's love really is stronger than any mountain winter. And sometimes, when you open your door to someone in need, you end up saving yourself. The story Emma's mother had set in motion with one desperate, hopeful act had reached its conclusion. Not a perfect ending, perhaps, but a real one. A good one, a home, built from loss and courage and love. Where two people who'd been alone in the world had found each other just in time. And that, Silas thought as he closed the book and carried his sleeping daughter inside, was more than enough. It was everything.